Hello everybody and welcome back to the PixieCast. Thank you so much for joining me. For anybody that's new here, hi, my name is Connor. I'm the Paranormal Pixie, and this is my podcast, the PixieCast. I'm a paranormal historian and former tour guide based in Los Angeles, and I use this podcast as a chance to share some of my favorite stories from across my many personal obsessions. So if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe here, wherever you're watching, listening, follow me on my social medias at Paranormal Pixie, and yeah, subscribe, give me a like. Thanks. I'm trying not to drag these intros on too terribly long now, but you can find my sources, relevant images, and a copy of the recording script on my website, paranormalpixie.com. A lot of silent film history is lost to us. The Library of Congress estimates that about 75% of all silent films are just gone, completely lost to time. No physical evidence that they ever existed. Back in the day, film was just kind of considered disposable. It's very fragile. Physical film is very, very fragile, which makes storing it very difficult. And audience interest, much like today, is very fleeting. So why bother going through the trouble of keeping film reels around if they're not popular? Even then, precious few archives have withstood the test of time. Since physical film is insanely flammable, entire collections have gone up in smoke. And not just people's amateur collections either. Universal Studios, Paramount Studios, and our National Film Archive here in America have all gone up in flames. This means that a huge chunk of film history is just completely lost to time. Some of the most popular silent films of their eras, ones that audiences lined up to see, we now only know about through descriptions in other sources, information in studio archives, promotional material, on-set photography, or even personal accounts like fans' journals that really liked what they saw. This includes the work of famous people. Rudolph Valentino, Lon Chaney has several missing films as well. But today, I thought I would tell a different kind of forgotten silent era story. 100-year-old Hollywood whodunit. Let's go. Buckle up, because we are going way back to the beginning of Hollywood as a film industry to take a look at the bizarre death of film pioneer Thomas Ince. I love stories like this because they are so unique to Los Angeles. This is the kind of story where there is the official story, the one that's published in the papers, but then there is an entirely different story that the film industry knows and understands to be true. All of this evidence is told in secondhand accounts, no physical proof, just all spoken words and whispers. Over the decades, fact and fiction starts to blend until finally you have yourself a full-blown Hollywood urban legend. You think of things like the death of Marilyn Monroe or Paul Byrne or George Reeves, one of the first Supermen's suicides. Two of those I will get to in other episodes. I'll let you guess which two. But here is the overview of today's PixieCast case. That was difficult to say. Thomas Ince is considered one of LA film industry's first mega producers. The man cranked out Western movies like R.L. Stine cranks out kids' horror novels. Ince owned a ton of property around LA and offered year-round access to his sets to movie makers. Everything you could possibly need: permanent sets, animal rentals, wardrobe options, even editing bays, all for a fee. When millionaire, nepo baby, and media tycoon William Randolph Hearst decides to dip his toe into the movie biz, a friendship with Thomas Ince becomes a top priority to getting settled in Hollywood. So, Hearst invites Ince out to celebrate his birthday on his massive yacht. They set sail for a weekend of 1920s revelry, along with a boat full of silent Hollywood blue bloods, including Marion Davies, Hearst's mistress, and Charlie Chaplin, who is probably what you think of when you think of the silent era. The two were rumored to have an affair of their own. Shortly after Thomas Ince's tense and awkward celebratory birthday dinner, thanks to this awkward love triangle that is going on aboard the ship, the yacht makes sudden port, and the movie producer Ince is secretly unloaded to meet with a doctor in the middle of the night, without warning or explanation to any of the remaining yacht guests. 3 days later, Ince is pronounced dead, and his body is immediately cremated without an autopsy. Hearst and everybody else aboard the yacht that night refused to speak of the weekend celebrations or Ince's death for the remainder of their lives. Definitive answers for what happens aboard the yacht and how Thomas Ince dies went to the graves of all of these people. So let's jump into one of Hollywood's first murder cover-ups. Maybe. Allow me to introduce our victim, Thomas Ince. The early days of Los Angeles had very little to do with the film industry. Most movies were made overseas or in other areas of the country like New York. Thomas Edison pretty much had a monopoly on early American film, which is a whole other thing. I think Drunk Histories did an episode of it. Not relevant for today. But American filmmakers looking to escape Edison's iron control over the film industry chose to work in Europe, or more surprisingly, Cuba, which is where Thomas Ince starts working. Los Angeles is not on any kind of movie industry radar. The city is barely out of its Wild West era at the time. Like at this time, which is going to be in the 1910s, the 1920s, the city of Hollywood is a tiny community of uptight religious teetotalers surrounded by orange groves. No Hollywood sign, nothing that you would recognize today. That is, until a film scout searching for a location to film a Western turned up. The legend goes, originally, the producers of this Western movie wanted something authentic and intended to set up production in Flagstaff, Arizona. But when the location scout arrived, Flagstaff was covered in snow, because turns out parts of Arizona do get snow. Not wanting to wait for spring, this nameless film pioneer hopped back on the train and kept heading west until the snow stopped, which just happened to be Hollywood, California. We don't know who this forebearer on the train was, if there even was one. But we do know that Thomas Ince produced the first movie made in Hollywood. It was a short Western movie titled In Old California, and it was released in 1910. It was directed by soon-to-be film legend D.W. Griffith. Old California is what you call a one-reel movie, meaning that it is entirely contained on one reel of film, which means that it is a lengthy 17 minutes. And it is set in the early Mexican era of California history. I am 100% it didn't age well. Look at this image. But the modern world will never know, because Old California is one of those silent films lost to history. I will say, for the record, people often credit 1914's The Squaw Man, directed by another soon-to-be legend, Cecil B. DeMille, as the first movie in Hollywood. It is the first full-length one, but I personally consider Old California to be the first movie made in LA because the one reel would have been more popular at the time and probably got more play. Little tangent there, thanks. Once In California hit theaters, more filmmakers began to leave New York for the sunshine and open spaces of Los Angeles. One huge benefit of filming out here in LA at the time would be the fact that California is sunny a vast majority of the time. You don't need to shoot on sound stages in the same way that you would if you were filming a Western in England or, New York or wherever else. So at this point in time, people are really starting to come in. We're going to have people like D.W. Griffith, Charlie Chaplin, Carl Laemmle, all came to LA around this time. So all of this is going on in the background as we talk about Ince. This is really just the film industry in Hollywood in its infancy. So who is Thomas Ince? Thomas Ince is a man with a unique approach to filmmaking. He realized that the best way to make as many movies as possible, as much money as possible, was to create a pseudo factory city centered around filmmaking. Ince bought a ton of land near the coastline in what is now the Pacific Palisades and nicknamed it Inceville. It will eventually be expanded to a massive 18,000 acres centered around where Lake Shrine is today. Basically, Thomas Ince owned a large chunk of the burn path from the recent Palisades fire here in Los Angeles in 2025. Just to give you an idea of how much land it was and where it was located. Ince separated filmmaking into departments: wardrobe, sets, makeup, lighting, editing, writer, and director, all separate jobs. He also required scripts produced by him to be finalized and approved before any of those other production elements could start. Inceville pioneered the concept of a second unit, which is a huge benefit to the film industry. What this is a different director and crew working on the same movie as the first director and crew on a second location, which essentially allows filming in two places at once and makes the process go a little faster. Thomas Ince's method works because this is exactly how the vast majority of movies are still made today. Inceville as a property would eventually contain interior and exterior sets, production offices, film developing labs, a giant cafeteria, prop and costume warehouses and storage, dressing rooms and makeup spaces, a European street, a Puritan village street, a Japanese village street, full-sized sailing ships, 2 of them, one dry docked and one wet docked in the ocean, and beautiful gardens and farms. Ince even invited a traveling Wild West stunt show to live on the property full-time and appear as extras in movies and take care of the animals. They brought with them hundreds of farm animals, and these were genuine cowboys and cowgirls and even a small Native American tribe, or at least a small group of members. Ince built full farms and stables and housing to accommodate all of their needs. Inceville had everything you needed to crank out westerns by the dozens. And oh boy, did it. Thomas Ince is going to produce over 800 movies between 1910 and his death in 1924. It's a lot of movies. This is Hollywood, the early days. As movies became more readily available and genres became more popular, like specific genres became popular, the diversity of it, and early fan culture starts to grow. Crowds of thousands of fans would gather outside filming locations and studios, hoping to see a glance of their favorite stars, like Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Rudolph Valentino, Clara Bow. I'm including this because I love it so much. When Rudolph Valentino suddenly dies in 1926, an actual global panic started. People died. People killed themselves. It was madness. But that is a story for an entirely other PixieCast, though, because Thomas Ince is going to be dead long before Valentino kicks the bucket. And to accommodate all of these big stars, an intricate studio system emerges. Around, at the time, these are called featured players. Essentially, how a studio works is a group of producers pool money and buy a nice plot of land, build some permanent sets, some sound stages, and provide all of the relevant facilities for including storing film and film processing, because you have to develop film back in the day. These studios and producers would then lure promising and attractive faces that they think they can groom into being talent. Faces and names that they think will bring them money. And they get them to sign exclusive contracts, tying them solely to the one studio or the one director. Still sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Thomas Ince, for the most part, was his own standalone, studio. Thomas Ince, Inceville, Ince, he was himself. He did try his hand at a couple of joint ventures, including Triangle Productions, which does put out some pretty iconic silent films for the time. But none of them really worked out for him. Eventually, Ince decides to move away from Inceville to be closer to the rest of the studios and, more importantly, the rest of the stars. And he moves his movie production a few miles inland to Culver City. He also had an opportunity to make a change, because when he opened this new studio space, he made sure that it was ready for the latest film craze: American colonial and Civil War shit. Yeah. Culver Studios' most iconic building is a full-scale replica of George Washington's home, Mount Vernon, and it still stands today right across the street from the Trader Joe's. When Ince opened up shop, there were 40 other colonial revival buildings containing more sets, production houses, offices, and star bungalows, along with several traditional sound stages, a large pool, fire department, and even a mini hospital. The sound stages and other colonial buildings do play a very interesting part in the remaining film history, so we'll put a pin in that and revisit it at the very end of this episode. So, film industry's growing, film industry's booming. It goes from being a creative passion to a real money maker. The Hollywood film industry at this point became such a fervor, it was like a gold rush. By the 1920s, people with deep pockets like Howard Hughes and William Randolph Hearst began to arrive and make waves, throwing money around to secure the best actors, the best writers, the contracts, and even buying out other studios. This brings us back to Thomas Ince in 1924. As William Randolph Hearst shifted film operations from New York to Los Angeles, he approached Ince to rent out a portion of Culver Studios and some other nearby land that Hearst could use for his own productions. He had a company, it was called Cosmopolitan Productions. The pair were nearing a deal that would allow Thomas Ince to continue his day-to-day production schedule while Hearst started his own. Fortunately, this was still the silent era, so you could entirely fill up a studio with dozens of movies at once without even having to think about the audio. So Hearst comes to Ince's apartment in Hollywood to finish ironing out the last of the deals. When I say apartment, this is like a lavish penthouse. But while they are there ironing out the last of the deals, Hearst learns that Ince's birthday is coming up in just a few short days on November 16th. So Hearst invites Ince to spend the weekend celebrating on his yacht, the Oneida, a retired warship, because Hearst had that kind of money lying around. Okay. Ince, of course, took him up on his offer, and the two made plans to leave LA on the evening of November 14th, 1924, for a quick cruise to San Diego and back. There would be food, music, plenty of familiar faces, and, despite prohibition, maybe a little champagne. The night out at sea. When November 14th arrived, Thomas Ince was not off to a great start. He spent the entire day elbow deep in production decisions for dozens of movies, not to mention the financial books weren't balancing. And the latest box office numbers were less than expected, which was not going to help him catch up financially. Everything took so long that Hearst's yacht leaves without Ince aboard, and now Ince is stuck speeding down to Long Beach to catch up with the Oneida at her next port. It was a heart-pounding sprint, but finally Ince boarded the yacht to be greeted by Hearst and a group of friends. Here is Davies with some balloons to welcome him. Now that we have all of our background and the stage is set, let's introduce our witnesses. Partygoers. The film industry was still pretty small in 1924, like really small. It's small today, it was really small back then. So Ince's birthday yacht weekend had a spider web of connections. So let's start first with the obvious. William Randolph Hearst. To just give a little bit more information on him. As I mentioned before, he is born rich, but he became the biggest media mogul of his time. At this point, he already owned a bunch of newspapers and theaters, and now he is looking to get into the movies. Hearst is notoriously ill-tempered and dangerous when jealous, and he is currently having an affair with Marion Davies. The pair had been doing a terrible job of hiding their relationship, which, despite their 35-year age gap, was headed into its 8th year. Davies is Hearst's #1 most prized possession, and he would have her followed by security whenever she was out of his sight. Things were a little awkward on the Oneida, as I mentioned, because a few days prior, the New York Daily Mail, not owned by Hearst, printed that someone else aboard the yacht was paying Davies ardent attention, which is scandalous. In the 1920s, that is basically inferring that they were sleeping together. That person was Charlie Chaplin, the actor, writer, director, and, as I said, probably the person you picture when you think of a silent movie. He is also a habitual womanizer. It is rumored that he is invited aboard the Oneida in an attempt to suss out if the Daily Mail's reports were true. Wherever Chaplin goes, he takes his valet, Tarachi Kono, who this is the go-to guy for Chaplin. He even appears in several of his movies. I did a little extra digging into Kono's backstory just for this, and he lived a really interesting life that is totally worthy of its own PixieCast episode, which included spending time in Japanese internment camps during World War II. Kono is going to provide some key testimony for this weekend's events. Not as important, but also present on Hearst's yacht for Ince's birthday celebration is Elinor Glenn. She is a novelist and Marion Davies' best friend. She was one of Hollywood's most popular female screenwriters and actually got her start writing salacious erotic romance novels to pay the bills after her husband was injured and could not work. His pension wasn't enough to support her, so she supplemented it by writing bodice rippers. Glenn helped lay the groundwork for the strong, independent, feminist flapper, or kind of it girl, that is so iconic to the 1920s. I did a little bit more digging into her biography for this, and damn, she is such a wild person. I would love to revisit her at some point. One last final fact, because I fell in love with her doing this. Eleanor Glenn was present in the room for the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. She is one of 2 women present there, and it is because she was working at the time as a war correspondent. How cool. How cool. I love her. I love her. And then there is Luella Parsons. She has a very popular gossip column published in a few of Hearst's papers. She has already earning herself a reputation as the queen of Hollywood gossip and was hoping that her new nickname would earn her complete countrywide syndication across all of Hearst's papers. Hearst is said to have kept her around so that she could keep him and his matters out of the paper. And finally, our last guest, Dr. Goodman. He is a licensed, non-practicing physician employed by Hearst, it seems like full-time. He is in Hearst's regular orbit, and so he is coming along for this cruise. He is also going to be important later. There isn't an itinerary from Ince's birthday weekend on the Oneida, so I am going to build a little bit of an educated narrative to string together everybody's testimony. I do promise that at the end of this, I will separate all of the facts from the fiction. Let's go. Thomas Ince arrived at the yacht later than expected on November 14th, 1924. So it was decided that most of the birthday festivities would take place the following day, November 15th. Our gaggle of silent era elite spend the remaining of the evening on the 14th and most of the next day doing whatever it is rich people do on yachts. I am assuming playing shuffleboard, reading books, smoking, probably drinking and talking with each other. Chaplin is doing his absolute best to cozy up to Marion Davies every time Hearst leaves her alone. Hearst, for his part, is intentionally leaving Chaplin and Davies alone so he could spy on them. He was growing ever more jealous and suspicious of his precious mistress's loyalties, and it was insanely awkward and made everybody else aboard uncomfortable, but it's Hearst's yacht, so, I guess everybody's just dealing with it. Davies, for her part, is not at all interested in being in the middle of two horny men. She wanted to spend her time with her bestie, Eleanor Glenn, because Eleanor Glenn is super cool and eccentric. I want to spend time with her. I like to think that Luella Parsons probably spent her time circling between all of the different people, trying to learn some tasty gossip or some Hollywood insider tip to share with her readers. Especially this potential love triangle brewing aboard. She is desperate to get syndication from her column, so she is doing her best to impress Hearst, passing along whatever she sees of Chaplin and Davies, fanning the flames of the jealousy. Yes, I like to imagine that Luella Parsons is a Reader Skeeter type. Based on what I know from them both, I feel like it is incredibly accurate. There is your Harry Potter reference for this episode. Check! Finally, it came time to gather for the official Thomas Ince celebratory dinner. Everybody gathers around the yacht's dining table. Her staff brings in course after course of delicious food, red meats, tons of butter, the whole shebang. Tensions were already high between Hearst, Davies, and Chaplin. They apparently couldn't set aside the middle school behavior over dinner, so the meal is very awkward, but everybody muddles through and still has a pretty decent evening. The festivities ended with dessert and a champagne toast to the health of the birthday boy. Oof. After dinner, everybody splits up to spend the rest of their evening milling about, doing whatever they were doing before until it's time for bed. In the middle of the night, Ince supposedly becomes violently ill after the decadent meal. So sick, in fact, that Dr. Goodman, the doctor aboard, felt unable to help him, so the Oneida goes to port and Dr. Goodman takes Ince off to see a more experienced physician. Ince is first taken to a nearby hotel, where a doctor and nurse are summoned to check him out. While there, Dr. Goodman summons Ince's wife, Eleanor Nell, her two sons, and Ince's personal physician, Dr. Ida Glasgow. This team of people transported Ince back to his home in Los Angeles, where he dies in his bed only 3 days after his 44th birthday on November 19th, 1924. The official cause of death listed on the death certificate signed by Dr. Ida Glasgow is heart failure. Back on board the Oneida, when the remaining guests learned of Ince's sudden illness and departure, they were so concerned that the party mood was completely ruined, and everybody went their separate ways. Following Ince's death, a few days later, all agreed to never speak about the weekend again. So I just explained a pretty boring, seemingly straightforward accidental death. Where is the intrigue? Where is the cover-up I promised? Well, there is one account that I have not factored into my story yet, that of Chaplin's valet, Torachi Kono. He will swear that he saw Ince being taken off of the Oneida with a bullet wound to the head, or at least some sort of massive bloody head injury. Kono tells his wife what he saw, and of course, the rumor immediately starts to spread around the Hollywood domestic workers and other production people. The morning after Ince's death, which would have been November 24th, 1924, the LA Times, not owned by Hearst, ran the front page headline, "Movie producer shot on Hearst's yacht," only to retract the statement in their evening editions without explanation or apology. They just changed their reporting. Even more mysterious, Thomas Ince is buried without an autopsy, something that would be impossible today considering the cryptic sudden timeline of his illness and death. Now, Ince's wife, refused to allow for an autopsy, insisting that the body be cremated and the messy paperwork be over and done with quickly. Bam! Bam! How's that for a mystery? Over the 100 years that have passed since Ince's death, some really fun theories have emerged to explain what really happened. Most of them involve Ince getting caught in the middle of Marion Davies' rocky love life. And these theories get really specific. You'll see. Theory A. Hearst shot first. In this story, Ince's birthday dinner goes smoothly, even if it's awkward. After the meal, the guests retire to the various spots aboard the Oneida to enjoy the rest of their evening. Charlie Chaplin and Marion Davies were having a conversation below deck. Hearst overheard his mistress flirting and laughing with Chaplin, and in a fit of anger, huffs off to grab his diamond-encrusted shotgun. Yes, that is a thing that Hearst actually owned. He apparently kept it aboard to shoot at pesky seagulls, which seems cruel until you've encountered an aggressive seagull. Then you get it. Anyway, while Hearst is away grabbing his gun, Chaplin gives up on flirting with Davies and wanders off to another part of the ship, leaving his signature bowler hat behind on a table. Ince then came up to start chatting with Davies. He notices Chaplin's mistake and took the bowler hat and placed it on his head to do an impersonation of the star, trying to make Davies laugh. At that exact moment, Hearst storms into the room like a madman, raises the pistol, and shoots directly at that stupid bowler hat with his diamond gun without looking twice, striking Ince in the head by accident in a fit of jealous rage. Theory B. Hearst is a terrible shot. Similar to the first one, dinner goes great. Everybody's afterwards. They're in their different areas after dinner. They're chatting. Chaplin and Davies are talking and they're flirting. This time, when Hearst gets back with his Fortnite pistol, Chaplin is still there. Hearst aims at the stupid hat yet again, and bang! The bullet misses, whizzes past its target, and strikes Ince on the other side of a window. Theory C and D, these are variations where Ince intentionally jumps between Chaplin and Hearst, either jumping to prevent Chaplin from being hit, or in an attempt to stop the gun going off, Ince grabs the weapon to try to take it from Hearst, and it goes off while he's trying to break up this physical altercation. This brings us finally to theory E. That's show business, baby. This is the most ruthless conspiracy. It poses that Hearst intentionally invited Ince aboard the Oneida with an ulterior motive: murder. It said that the negotiations for Cosmopolitan Productions and Culver Studios' land had really stalled out, and Hearst was starting to grow impatient. A birthday celebration out on the open sea with a hand-picked guest list would be the perfect cover to poison Ince. Take the studio head out of play and force Ince's widow to fork over Culver Studios at a much lower price. Several people on board the yacht receive sudden positive windfalls courtesy of William Randolph Hearst following Ince's death. Luella Parsons, the gossip columnist, who never met a rumor she wasn't willing to publish, which is why it is odd that she never says a peep about Thomas Ince's death. Shortly after the incident, Luella's column, In and Out of Focus, received national syndication across Hearst's entire newspaper network, and she keeps that position for the remainder of her long life. Hearst often goes out of his way to defend Luella's sensationalism and journalism, regardless of the truth, as long as she left his affairs out of print. Eleanor Glenn's career was already pretty solid. She was an established author and popular film writer. There really wasn't much that Hearst had to offer her that Glenn couldn't get for herself. Still, when asked directly about the death of Thomas Ince, Glenn politely declines, saying that Hearst asked her not to speak of it. Charlie Chaplin is also tight-lipped, and it's not surprising, since he was incredibly famous at the time, like one of the most recognizable faces in the world, probably. Being tied to something as scandalous as a potential murder would be a huge hit to his popularity and his wallet at the time, which, nah, he's staying quiet, he's not talking. Marion Davies, Hearst's mistress, even though their relationship was already one of the worst kept secrets in media history, her comfortable life, and to a large extent her career as an actress, is entirely dependent on Hearst. She had everything to lose if it came out that Hearst was a murderer. Hearst and Davies would stay together until the end of his life in 1951. There is even an industry rumor that he died in her arms and that his body was taken back to his actual wife for the death to be reported. Once Hearst died, though, Davies is kicked out of the home that she lived in with him for decades and is even prevented from attending Hearst's funeral by his wife. Suddenly, Davies is a little more willing to let some secrets slip. I mean, same girl, I'd be the same. Spill those beans. Davies says in an interview once that the name Thomas Ince was banned in Hearst's presence, and that if the Western producer's name did come up, the usually poker-faced Hearst would go absolutely still. Fellow early Hollywood heavyweight D.W. Griffith confirmed the same, saying, quote, "All you have to do to make Hearst turn white as a ghost is mention Ince's name. There's plenty wrong there, but Hearst is too big to touch." End quote. Eleanor Ince, the widow, it's said that Hearst sets her up with a sizable trust fund and bought her a luxury apartment complex in a nice part of Hollywood where she could continue to live her lavish lifestyle between the trust fund and rent until her death in 1950. The place is called the Chateau Elise and still stands today. Hearst often would rent units at Chateau Elise to house some of his rising film talent. Nell would move to Europe a few decades after her husband's death, selling the apartment complex in the 1940s before moving to Europe. I promised you the facts. As I mentioned at the start, most of the party guests never spoke of their weekend and Ince's death. And they did a pretty good job of keeping tight-lipped, so there are precious few known facts. Here they are, though. 1. Ince did meet the Oneida in Long Beach on November 14th, 1924, because he was caught up in his studio problems. Dinner was had on the second night of their adventure, November 15th. Ince was taken off the boat in the middle of the night to meet a doctor and his family, and Ince died at home on the 19th, and heart failure is listed as the cause of death on his certificate. Finally, Torachi Kono swears until his dying day that he saw Ince bleeding out from a head wound. Everything else is speculation or hearsay. There is a chance that Luella Parsons was not even on the Oneida for the weekend. She's part of the surrounding myth, but I actually couldn't find any contemporary sources to confirm she was there. Even if she was a guest, the ink on her syndication contract would have dried long before she ever boarded the yacht. So the story that she benefited from the cover-up kind of falls apart, which means she probably wasn't part of the cover-up at all. When it comes to Nell Ince, the widow, refusing the autopsy, there are two factors here. 1, since doctors were present for almost the entirety of Ince's decline, and his own physician, Dr. Ida Glasgow, signed the death certificate, as far as a 1920s coroner is considered, that is dotting the I's and crossing the T's. There's no further cadaver mutilation needed. 2, the Inces were Theosophists, a spiritual and practice religion started by a Russian woman named Helena Blavatsky, and it is very popular at the turn of the century. Theosophists believed in a quick cremation to help the soul pass on. Also, this is the 4th time Theosophy and Blavatsky have come up in the PixieCast for those keeping track at home. Sorry if you can hear Parsons sneezing. We're almost there. Nell and Dr. Glasgow would later reveal that Ince had experienced a heart attack a few months before his trip on the Oneida, and that he suffered from terrible stomach ulcers, limiting what he could safely eat. This had been kept a secret to avoid affecting his movie studio, Culver Studio, or Inceville, because Hollywood producers would immediately smell blood and was trying to start scooping up his employees. Ince frequently ignored his diet restrictions and seems to have set them aside entirely for his birthday celebrations, considering the menu that was served and his dietary restrictions. It is a slip-up that unfortunately costs him his life. The trust fund and property that Hearst supposedly gifted Nell, well, it turns out that the Inces were still pretty wealthy. Nell commissioned that luxury complex herself without her husband's help years ago. The Chateau Elise had been a revenue stream solely for her. All the money went to her pocket. A big deal for women in the 1920s. So she was independently wealthy on her own from renting the units out, in addition to the money that she had coming in from her husband Thomas Ince's film studio, and she had a trust fund set up from her maiden family. So she is not hurting. She does not need her help at all following her husband's death. Nell sells the building off in the 1940s. She does it so that she can move back to Europe to be with her family. Her younger son, Richard Ince, was a stunt driver, and he had died in a car accident in 1938. So Nell, who's from Europe, decided that she wanted to be closer to her support network as she reached the later chapters of her life. So she decided to pack up and move back home. The elder son, Thomas Ince Jr., stays in LA and actually works in the film industry till his death in the 1970s. Fun fact, the Chateau Elise, as I said, still stands today, and it is now the Scientology Celebrity Center. Gross. Nasty. It is a place that I flip off every single time we drive by, whether it is the freeway or surface streets, and I do apologize if I've accidentally flipped you off on the 101. It's not personal, it's principle against Scientology. Before Ince's sudden cremation, there actually was a brief 1-hour viewing of the body for family and friends to grieve. We don't know the exact number of people who saw Thomas Ince's body during this viewing period, but none of them reported any sort of head injury or suspicious injuries of any kind. Well, that's it. Another whodunit we'll never actually know the killer, but we all know the answer for. Some stories are better off as urban legends because it's like deflating a balloon to look at the details. I feel like I'm starting to be really good at that with this one and James Dean's Cursed Car, which you should check out that episode if you haven't. Anyway, Hearst didn't buy Culver Studio after Ince's death. It went to Cecil B. DeMille and eventually falling into Howard Hughes' hands for RKO Productions. This is a roundabout way to get to my favorite Gone with the Wind fact. The movie, which was shot in 1939, scenes showed Union soldiers burning Atlanta. This is an actual thing that happened during the Civil War. It's called Sherman's March to the Sea. It was very powerful, but my opinions on Civil War reconstruction can absolutely wait. For these scenes, the director, David O. Selznick, spared no expense trying to get them right. He made the wild decision to torch all of the wooden colonial sets built by Thomas Ince to get the full effect of Atlanta burning. It is actually the first scene shot for Gone with the Wind before anybody else was cast. The legend is that Selznick met leading lady Vivien Leigh while looking out over the burning fires of these sets. And apparently she was cast as Scarlett O'Hara right then and there. And that's kind of it. Wow, I'm so bad at wrapping these things up. There is a 2001 movie about Thomas Ince's death. It's called The Cat's Meow, and it stars Kristen Dunst as Davies, Cray Elwes as Thomas Ince, and Susie Izzard as Charlie Chaplin. It is fun, and it is streaming for free on Amazon Prime and Tubi as of May 2025 in America if you would like to see that. And that's it. I really hope you had a good time looking into one of an early Hollywood mystery. When I first moved to LA, I lived in Culver City, not far from the studio, so this story has kind of always been dear to me. Here's a cute little picture of me as a baby at Culver Studios. You can find that online if you're listening to me. You can find that picture along with all of my sources, this script, and some relevant photos on my website, paranormalpixie.com. I really hope that you enjoyed listening to me, or you're working or something like that. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to my PixieCast. I am so honored to share these stories with you. It is really keeping me sane in the madness that is 2025. So I really appreciate you being with me here in this coping mechanism. As always, I do not know what my next topic is going to be. I have that massive notebook, but if you have suggestions, let me know. Give me the like, give me the subscribe, give me a comment. I love you all, and I'll see you later. Bye.